Good morning, everybody. My little clock up here says it's 9:02, so I guess it's time for us to get started. We're seeing more and more faces joining us, and it's good to see everybody out this morning, and Don and Linda and Connie and the folks coming back in. So we're getting more people in from the COVID days and recovering from injuries and surgeries, and it's really, really glad to see everybody. For those that are still joining us on Facebook or YouTube, we're glad to have you with us also. This morning our lesson is going to be from Genesis 13. We're going to be talking about the separation of Abraham and Lot. If I understand Mitch's schedule correctly, next Sunday will be my last time teaching you before he gets back. In the book, lesson 11 on Hagar and Ishmael. So like Zach said last week, I'm sure Mitch is having a good time over in Hawaii and accomplishing a lot of good things. So we'll be glad to have him back. So before we get started, let's go to God in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we bow before you this glorious morning, recognizing creation around us and the beauty of life. We are so glad, Father, to be gathering together as your children to study this book of Genesis, the book of beginnings, to look at the events that are recorded for us and how we can apply them to our lives. Father, we ask to be with us through this study that we may accurately reflect your word. We ask that you guide us in your footsteps. In thy Son's name we pray. Amen. So Genesis 13. To recap where we are, Abraham has moved with his family from Ur up to the Mesopotamian area down to Canaan. Last week we talked about their sojourn into Egypt during a time of famine. And today we pick it up with them coming out of Egypt and moving on to the next events here in Genesis 13. We have two now large groups of people. Abram and his family, all of his servants, all of his livestock. Lot and his family and all of the livestock there coming out of Egypt and settling in the land. And so let's read the first 4 verses of Genesis 13. And I'm reading out of the New American Standard. That's my study Bible. And all the verses on the screen will be from the English Standard Version. So it might be a little bit of difference. So Abram went up from Egypt to the Negev, he and his wife and all that belonged to him, and Lot with him. Now Abram was very rich in livestock and silver and in gold. And when he went on his journeys from the Negev as far as Bethel to the place where his tent had been at the beginning between Bethel and Ai, to the place of the altar which he had made there formerly, and there Abram called on the name of the Lord. So we have these two large families coming out of Egypt, settling in, going back up to Bethel. A basic map here of Canaan at the time of Abraham. And I originally was going to do a little mini geography, but I ran out of space. So we have Shechem, which is the first place that he settled when he came down into Canaan. Then he made an altar between Bethel and Ai. And then went down to the south, went to Egypt, came back to the south, the Negev, and now he's back up around Bethel. And just out of curiosity, and I think we've talked about this before, we see Salem here, or Mount Moriah. What else do we know that city by today, or in other Bible events? Jerusalem, okay? And as we go through Genesis and the rest of the Old Testament, Mount Moriah is going to play a role in a lot of different events. So just keep in mind the geography here. What is the other big thing about Ai? If you think forward 400 or 500 years from my timing of the Bible, what happened at Ai?
The battle that they lost.
Okay, the first battle after crossing the River Jordan into the Promised Land after all the Israelites came out of Egypt, they lost the battle because they didn't follow God's commandments. Actually, So anyway, so these cities will continue to play a part in all of these activities And Canaan is a really small area. I mean, if you look at this area of the map, if you think about the state of Florida, it's like between Orlando and Miami. That's how big this area is. So it plays over and over and over again a part in the Old Testament events that happen. So how wealthy was Abraham?
That's for sure.
Okay. Who was a contemporary of Abraham most likely from other books of the Bible that was also very, very wealthy? Job. Most likely Job was a contemporary of Abraham living at about the same time. So at that point in time, wealth wasn't money per se, but it was how many servants and how much livestock you had. And the Bible tells us that Abraham was very, very wealthy. Where did he get this wealth from? Ma'am? Okay, some from Egypt. Specifically, it talks about when he left with the events with Sarai's wife, that Pharaoh, gave him sheep and camels and servants. So some of it came from Pharaoh. Where else did he get it from? Well, it all came from God, the growth that he got, absolutely.
You have your reference to the Egyptians, because once they left, they just gave them some of what they needed.
Right, some of it. But what did he bring with him from? From Haran. What did he bring with him from Haran? Servants and livestock. So he had some of that when he came down into this land. And obviously, to me, it's obvious that it had grown and developed. And being a man after God's own heart, man of faith, God had rewarded him. And his wealth had grown over this time frame. So Abram was a very, very wealthy man. Lots of livestock. What does livestock take? Land. I've got 5.5 acres in Dixon, in Hickman County, south of Dixon. My 2 cows right now that are a little bit over a year old are doing a really good job of keeping 3.5 to 4 acres of pasture mowed down. And so you can only imagine how much land would have taken to support who knows how many heads of livestock, cattle and sheep and everything. And you can imagine if you think about the United States and out west with some of the open grazing, it takes thousands of acres to support livestock out in the western part of the United States. So the area of land that they would have had needed to occupy to support all this would have been massive. Today, if you look at this area, Hebron, Gerar, Jerusalem, what do you see when you look at pictures of that area now? Is it really an oasis of growth, of produce?
No, as the text states, it was before he destroyed.
I'm sorry?
As the text states, it was before God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah and turned it into a wasteland.
Well, that would be that part on the eastern side of the Dead Sea, absolutely. But if we look at Israel today, on the west side of the mountain between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea, do we see a plush green area that people grow a lot of crops in? The answer is no. What was this land like, again, 300 or 400 years after this when they sent the spies up into this area of the world? Green, talks about flowing with milk and honey. So over time, this area has gone from a very fertile area to not as fertile. But at this point in time, this area through here, the Bible tells us was very capable of supporting a lot of people. I mean, 2 million Jews, 2 million Israelites plus or minus moved into this area coming out of Egypt. But even with all of that, Abram and Lot and their herdsmen and all their cattle and everything couldn't exist in this area here without some issues. So they settled in there, started living life, and conflict happens. So let's read verses 5 through 9. Now Lot, who went with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents, and the land could not sustain them while dwelling together, for their possessions were so great that they were not able to remain together. And there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. Now the Canaanite and the Perizzite were dwelling in the land. So then Abram said to Lot, please let there be no strife between you and me, nor between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are brothers. Is not the whole land before you? Please separate from me if to the left, then I will go right, and if to the right, then I will go left. So, we've already talked about that. So, we have two families here not able to live in the same area because of conflict. Now, we don't read that there's any conflict between Abram and Lot directly, but we do read that there was conflict between the support staff, I'll call it that, whatever it may be, for Abram and for Lot. And I meant to put some delayed entrance in here. I've given you two examples here in the Bible of people who had conflict in their lives. Are there any other examples that you would like to add to these two of Bible characters that you think about dealing with conflict in their lives with other people? Jacob and Esau is a good example, okay? Anybody else? So we're going to spend a good portion of the class talking about how we can apply what we learn from these characters about things, okay? So Abraham was the uncle, Lot was the nephew. What would be the tendency of a lot of people in this circumstance to do when there's conflict?
Abram would take first choice.
Abram taking first choice. I'm older, I'm the patriarch, I get first choice, I'm going to choose this, you get what's left. That's not what Abraham did. So when we're dealing with issues in our lives, what kind of approach do we take to things? And I'm going to give you some good examples and some bad examples from me, since I'm up here. I can remember one time sitting in the airport in Gainesville, Florida. Flight was delayed. I was going to be late for meetings up somewhere in New York, wherever the project was. And I was up at the counter with the gate agent, and the person in front of me was just chewing this gate agent out. And there was not a thing in the world that she could do to help this person out. The plane wasn't going. I'm not even sure the plane was there yet. And there was nothing she could do, but this person was, yelling and screaming, and everybody, the terminal building in Gainesville is not very big at that point in time. It was only 2 gates. You could probably hear this person yelling and screaming throughout the entire airport terminal. And finally, after 5 or 10 minutes of yelling at her, he finally sat down, and it was my turn next. I'm thinking, oh, great, what's going to happen to me now? So I walked up, and she said, no, how can I help you, sir? I said, well, I understand there's some issues. I'm just looking for options. And not yelling and screaming. No, just I understand that there's nothing you can do here. This isn't your fault. And you can see her just go, I'm not going to face another screaming idiot. And she, after a couple of minutes, I was on the next flight in first class. So again, how do you approach things? Now, I'm not always that good. I was actually talking to Dixon Horizon. They've messed up some billing for me from stuff that happened almost 2 years ago. And I was getting very frustrated with the customer service agent, and she wasn't giving me any answers. Now, I was looking for answers. What is my next step? And I admit that I raised my voice a little bit, and I was being very frustrated. And again, it wasn't her. And I ended up apologizing to her, but, I did. I raised my voice a little bit. I says, okay, what do you want me to do? What do you want me to do? This is your issue, your fault. And so she finally passed me. I asked to go up to her boss, and her boss couldn't give me any answers either. But the first thing he said is, don't yell at my customer service agents. And I said, I know, I apologized to her. But the point is yelling and screaming usually isn't going to accomplish anything. So, you're welcome to give examples in your life. There's lots of other examples I could give you, but when we're dealing with other people, how do we interact with them? And I really love Romans 12. I go back to this often when I'm dealing with these issues and thinking about things. Romans is after Acts. So starting in verse 9, let love be without hypocrisy, abhor what is evil, cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another in brotherly love, give preference to one another in honor, not lagging behind in diligence, fervent in spirit, serving the Lord, rejoicing in hope, persevering in tribulation, devoted in prayer, contributing to the needs of the saints, practicing hospitality. Bless those who persecute you, bless and curse not. Rejoice with those who rejoice, and weep with those who weep. Be of the same mind towards one another. Do not be haughty in mind, but associate with the lowly. Do not be wise in your own estimation. Never pay back evil for evil to anyone. Respect what is right in the sight of men. And this is the key verse to me. If possible, so far as it depends upon you, be at peace with all men. Never take your own revenge, beloved, but leave room for the wrath of God, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. But if your enemy is hungry, feed him, and if he is thirsty, give him a drink. And in so doing, you will heap burning coals upon his head. Do not overcome evil. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. So again, verse 18, if possible, so far as it depends upon you, be at peace with all men. How do we deal with issues in our lives? And it could be lots of different things. It could be with family members. I'm sure we've all heard stories about family members who, after a death in the family of a parent, the children are at each other's throats over, wanting to get their fair share of things. How do we deal with people in our family, in our church family? Do we get our feelings hurt when someone says something and maybe not even the intent of the way they said it? How do we handle things? How do we perceive things? What is our response to things? At work, there's just so many opportunities in life that if we are living our lives like Abraham lived his life here, but when we're looking at the way that Jesus lived his life, how do we interact with people? How do we respond to people? When strife occurs, when difficulties arise, how do we handle things? I'd love to hear from someone here, if you want to volunteer something or talk about something. But to me, this is what differentiates us from the world. I had a sermon that I taught. I don't know if I've done it here or not, but I know I did it in Texas. When I was in Houston from 2012 to mid-2015. And get my dates right. Yeah, Trump was elected in 2016. So this would have been under the Obama administration. And we had someone that would drive their pickup to church, who on the back window of their pickup says, "Don't blame me, I voted for Bush," or whoever Obama was running against. I didn't vote for Obama, whatever it was. So here's a person who is intentionally being antagonistic to people that see his pickup truck. And what do you think an Obama supporter would be taught, would think, if they drove up to church seeking Christ and they see this pickup truck in the parking lot with this big old sign, "Don't blame me, I didn't vote for Obama." Is that how we want to present ourselves? Is that minimizing conflict and strife with those around us? And I could give you dozens of examples like that. God wants us to live seeking peace. And sometimes it means that we get the lesser end of it. If we look at Abraham and Lot, where did Lot choose? What part of the land did he choose? The best, the Jordan River Valley. Even today, that flourishes, green trees, the irrigation that happens from the Jordan River. Very productive land. You don't even think that you're in the Middle East when you look at the Jordan River Valley. That's what Lot chose. Don?
Go back to the other point. This is something that's very important. The social media, a lot of Christians put things on Facebook. It's like a sign on that truck. You need to really be careful in some of these posts.
Don, if you didn't hear what Don said, is expanding my comment about the sign on the truck. Today it's social media. No, you put something out on social media and lots of people see it. And I quite frankly, I'm not on any social media. I don't do Facebook. I don't do Twitter. I don't do Instagram. I don't look at any of those things. So I don't know what anyone has said on any of those topics on anything in the world, because I simply don't go there. But I know there were some issues here in the last couple of years about that. But what are we presenting to the world when we write comments in there? Okay, so Lot chose the best. Now, in reality, was there anything wrong with Lot's choice? No. But what were the consequences of Lot's choice? Long term, it cost him his family. Okay? The choice that he made after he chose the Jordan River Valley, where did he choose to build his house, his home?
Next to Sodom.
Next to Sodom. What was Sodom known for? Wickedness. Okay? Let's see where I am in my notes here. Okay, so before we get ahead of ourselves, Abram gave Lot the decision, the choice of where to go. Abraham diffused the situation by allowing Lot to have first choice. How do we deal with issues? How did David and Saul, how did David handle that issue?
He could have killed Saul a couple of times.
He could, several times he could have killed Saul. What did David do? He fled. He hid. He avoided Saul. He refused to act even when his men were pushing him to take care of the situation. David refused to act. How did Paul and Barnabas settle things, resolve things? Do we understand what happened in Acts 15? There was an argument over Mark. Barnabas wanted to take Mark with him. Something happened in the past, and Paul said, "No, I don't want to take Mark with me." So Paul and Barnabas separated. Did they become mortal enemies after this because they disagreed? No, if you read a couple chapters later in the book of Acts, they're back together again, working for God. So they did not let the disagreement that they had did not have the consequences of creating a massive split or a massive conflict between them. Paul took Silas, Barnabas took Mark, they went on their ways and did God's work, and they came back together later and everything was good. So, how do we handle those conflicts? So, let's look at the consequences of what happened. Verses 10 through 18. And Lot lifted up his eyes and saw all the valley of the Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, like the garden of the land. Start over again. And Lot lifted up his eyes and saw all the valley of the Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt as you go to Zoar. So Lot chose for himself all the valley of the Jordan, and Lot journeyed eastward, and they separated from each other. Abram settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled in the cities of the valley, and moved his tents as far as Sodom. Now the men of Sodom are wicked exceedingly, and sinners against the Lord. And the Lord said to Abram, after Lot had separated from him, now lift up your eyes and look from your place to where you are, northward and southward, eastward and westward. For all the land which you see, I will give it to you and to your descendants forever. And I will make your descendants as the dust of the earth, so that if anyone can number the dust of the earth, then your descendants can also be numbered. Arise, walk about the land through its length and breadth, for I will give it to you. Then Abram moved his tent and came and dwelt by the oaks of Mamre, which are in Hebron, and there he built an altar to the Lord. So, a couple of questions that come out of this. One of the points that was made by a couple of the commentaries that I was using talked about Abram was willing to give up the land of the promise. I think that's a little bit of a stretch. But, Abram was willing to take the Jordan River Valley if Lot had chosen the land of Canaan. Gave Lot his choice. I don't want to read anything into this. I think Abram was settling a conflict. So, we know that Lot ended up with his tents near Sodom. Are there any lessons that we can learn from that? And I've got the points up there. Growing up, and even when I was in college at Georgia Tech, going to church at Embry Hills in Atlanta, I heard many, many times, you can't move to fill in the blank because there are no churches there. You can't go to, at that point in time it was Las Vegas, because it's a city of sin. And is that really what the lesson here is? I don't think so. Are we going to say that as a Christian we can't live somewhere because the place is evil? Well, where are we going to choose to live then? There are better places to live. Les and I really, really like raising our family in Gainesville, Florida. If you've ever been to Gainesville, Florida, there are some issues there too. So it's really not an issue of Lot choosing this area ended up being the downfall of his life. So what mistake did Lot make once he got into this area of the Jordan River Valley?
That's going to have to go back to this age-old statement or whatever. If you lay with a dog, you're going to get fleas on you. Now, I don't know whether or not Lot knew about Sodom and Gomorrah in that area. But once he got there, I think he could see and understand the challenge that was before him and the evilness that he was, might I say, exposed to. And might I say, he was weak in that area.
Okay, why do I have 1 Corinthians 5, 9 through 10 up here? Anybody know what that says? Just flip over and read that real quick. Paul has just finished talking about the moral issues of the church at Corinth, the incest of someone living with their father's wife. And it's gone through all of this. But when he gets to verse 9, I wrote to you in my letter not to associate with immoral people. I did not at all mean with the immoral people of this world, or with the covetous or swindlers, or with the idolaters, for then you would have to go out of the world. In verse 11, he talked about telling them not to deal with the immoral people that were part of the church. But Paul made it very clear that we are not to isolate ourselves from the world. We are not to go and live in this little, I've forgotten the term, cult area. There's a term for it. We can't hedge ourselves in against the world and have no interactions with the world, because then we can't have an influence on them. Okay? So, now, going back to my example of living in Las Vegas 30 years ago, it's going to take a special person to do that. And I know some preachers, and even going into Central and South America and other parts of the world, going to China. I mean, I know some people have gone into China to preach the gospel over there. Very, very dangerous place. So it takes special people to do those kinds of things, but part of our responsibility is to be the light to the world. And we can't do that by hedging ourselves in and never going out into the world, which is an evil place. I mean, Corinth was every bit as evil as Las Vegas was 30 years ago or today, but still, Paul went there. Christians lived there, the gospel spread. So avoiding a place because it is evil isn't what God is commanding, except we need to understand what we're getting into. I don't know whether Lot knew what he was getting into or not when he made that decision. I suspect, and I don't remember who said it, I suspect that what happened in Sodom and Gomorrah was known to the world, at least that part of the world at that point in time. I mean, they didn't live in isolation with a guard saying no one can come out to tell us what we're doing here. So I suspect that Sodom and Gomorrah was known for the activities that went there. We certainly know from later on in the book here, the events with God destroying Sodom and Gomorrah, that it was a very evil place. So I'm not going to criticize Lot for choosing that area because it was better. He was given a choice. I'm not going to criticize Lot for living in the Jordan River Valley because that was one or the other. I'm not going to say that he should not have lived around Sodom because I don't know the circumstances there. Sawyer?
It's interesting that you bring up how we like to make a lesson out of Lot in this circumstance, because the lesson that I grew up learning about Lot in this circumstance was that he was the greedy nephew. That was his the label that I was always taught for him growing up whenever we do like Bible trivia and stuff, because he chose the quote-unquote more fertile land as opposed to Abraham. He used his first choice to get the better end of the deal. But just like you're saying, there's nothing in the text that insinuates that. I mean, Canaan was a land flowing with milk and honey. It was plenty fertile. If anything, it just shows that this land was perhaps equally as good for the type of production that he would be wanting out of the land. So it is interesting how we take texts like this and we try to make these inferences that help to make a lesson out of something that perhaps is just descriptive of just the circumstances.
Don?
I think certainly it was well water, and it had plenty of water there, which is very important.
Abram had to work harder in his land because they were digging wells everywhere to water everything. So Lot would have definitely had an easier life because of the water source. Ted?
There's a lot of scriptures that talk about the choices that we make and how we have to be careful. Be not unequally yoked. Evil companions corrupt. There was one other. That's not to say that we need to give consideration to the places that we choose to surround ourselves with, because our abilities may not be up to remaining free from the influence of those around us. It's not to say that we don't need to go or that people need to go. Someone needs to go. It may not be me, but we need to be guided. We need to be prayerful about it. I don't think Lot really gave much consideration to that. It does not indicate that he did. All he saw was, this is good. I'm going to get this. I believe that the image of Lot, especially based on his future behavior, was that he wasn't a very wise person. Isn't he one of the captives too?
I'm sorry?
Did he become one of the captives that were later?
Yeah, he definitely was captured by the 5 kings of that area, and Abram had to come rescue him a couple chapters later, absolutely.
So there are a lot of things about Lot that do not recommend him as a paragon to be emulated in the Bible.
I agree 100%. If you didn't hear Ted, to paraphrase his comment, we need to be careful with the circumstances that we put ourselves into. And I agree with that 100%. I would have thought very long and hard about taking Leslie and our 3 kids and moving to Managua, Nicaragua to work with the churches down there. Would that really be a wise thing to do? Now, it didn't take me 30 seconds to decide. When Margie was graduating from high school, they wanted her to go down there to work with some of the young kids in the churches in the area. It didn't take me 30 seconds to say, we're going. So again, using our wisdom and looking at the overall big picture of things, absolutely we should be doing that. But that's a thought out process. And you said something else, Ted, that I was going to make a comment. I forgot what it was.
Lot was not a paragon.
Oh, yeah, okay. Lot was not a paragon. Give me other people in the Bible that we are given examples of that didn't do a very good job doing things. Well, I wasn't even going to go there. I was going to go straight to Samuel. Samuel did not do a good job of raising his boys. Eli, example after example. David bringing all these foreign wives into his household absolutely impacted his children, his grandchildren. Solomon, with all of his wives, directly impacted his sons and how they behaved with things. So the Bible is full of examples of people who made bad choices and the consequences of those choices. And I think they're there for us to learn from. I think these events are there for us to learn from. Lot made a choice, and the end consequences of that is he wasn't ready to live near Sodom. He wasn't a strong enough person to live near Sodom. We don't know about Abraham because he didn't go there. Leslie?
And not only was he not strong enough to be in Sodom, but neither was his wife. So be careful who you marry, whether they have enough willpower and strength and moral standing to hold up to these things.
Leslie's point was his wife certainly didn't have the ability to resist what was going on there, because she looked back longingly at that land and the things that were going on there when they were told to get out. So, again, recognize the strengths and weaknesses of your family when you're making these kind of decisions also. Did I see another hand? Okay, so bottom line, how do we deal with people? How do we handle conflict? Are we looking out what is best for us? Or do we really let other people have the first choice of things because we're avoiding conflict? We want to avoid these issues. I'm going to talk about Mom and her siblings a little bit, because me and my siblings took some things away from her. When grandmother died, and I don't know the whole story, and I don't really care to know the whole story, but from what I understand, Mom and her 5 siblings peaceably settled that, and there was no arguments over who wanted what. They had a process laid out, and they divided up what they wanted and what they didn't wanted, and they're all friends today and get together and love each other. And those kinds of events can rip families apart. The story of the prodigal son is an example of that. You know, what right does he have to come back into this family? He's gotten his portion. Now you're going to give him another portion of this inheritance? Why didn't you treat me that way? Every single thing that we do in our lives, there's very little that we can do and hide it from the world. There's nothing that we can do and hide it from God. If you think back to the end of the southern kingdom, when God's getting ready to send them into captivity, one of the comments he made is, I see all the things that you do in the dark places. All the things that you're trying to hide, I see. So regardless of whether an elder of the church here sees it, regardless of whether another Christian sees something, how we act and how we behave, God sees. And when we are abusive to somebody, when we are out to get our way by treading on the heads or the backs of those around us, if we're climbing up the corporate ladder by destroying those people ahead of us or our peers, those aren't the right choices. And I've seen people, I've seen members of the church do things that I didn't think was the right thing to do. So, the lessons I want you to take from today is choices. How do we deal with choices? How do we deal with conflict? How do we put other people first, regardless of the circumstances? How do we try to live at peace with everybody, whether they're Christians or not? How do we try to live at peace with them by what we do? There are going to be some people out there that aren't going to let us live in peace. But as much as it is my choice, as much as it is your choice, we should always choose to make peace. That means you may walk away from money. You may walk away from property. You may walk away from a job. You may walk away from something. But our job is to maintain peace. Our responsibility is to maintain peace regardless of what's happening. Thank you.